Okay, I think we'll start there. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session Risk to Resilience Insurance as an Enabler for Climate Security. We're delighted to have you with us today as we explore how data, insurance, and collaboration can help cities strengthen their climate resilience. So, across the world, climate change is putting immense pressure on urban water systems. Floods, droughts, and heat waves are becoming more frequent and more severe. Yet, adaptation finance for water remains critically low, making up just 6.8% of total climate finance in 2021 to 2022. This gap between risk and resilience is widening, and cities are on the front line. So, to address these challenges, we need fresh approaches, ones that bring together inclusive risk assessments, robust data, innovative insurance solutions, and better access to finance. By the end of today's session, you'll walk away with practical insights you can apply right away, including how to use advanced tools to better assess and strengthen your city's resilience, leverage insurance and data to overcome investment barriers, and build stronger partnerships that unlock climate finance for water resilience projects. So here's how we'll structure our session. Firstly, we'll begin with the Resilient Cities Network, highlighting why resilience is critical for long-term success. Secondly, Arup will then showcase tools to diagnose risks and design a resilience roadmap. Fathom will demonstrate how data can strengthen insurance models and attract investment. Pegasus will explore climate finance mechanisms. And finally, British Expertise International will show how collaboration across organisations helps cities turn vision into action. So we'd love for you to engage throughout the session. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll get back to them at the end. And be ready to join our interactive polls on the Mentimeter. So keep your phones close by. So with that, I'll hand over to my colleague Elsa, who will show you how all these components will come together throughout the session to unlock investment and build resilience.
Great. Thank you very much, Cassia. Hi, everyone. My name is Elsa Germain. I'm a civil engineer at Arup, and I'm based in our London office. As Cassia mentioned, this session is co-convened by 5 different organizations, and we all have our very different roles. So there's Arup, BEI, Fathom, Pegasus, and the Resilient Cities Network. We each play our unique role in building resilience, and you might be wondering how we're all here co-convened making this session. That's because it's only through this collaboration that we can drive real impact. So to illustrate this, we'll be working together on this fictional case study that we've developed. The focus is Port of Resilience, this fictional mid-sized city facing growing threats from flooding, heat waves, and social vulnerability. Just last year, a flash flood forced over 10% of the population to evacuate their homes overnight. We'd like for you to keep this city in mind as we move through the session, and we'll return back to it later to co-develop a plan, an actionable plan, to unlock green financing and build long-term resilience for the Port of Resilience. I'll now pass on to Fathom from the Resilient Cities Network to set the context about what resilience means.
Thank you, Elsa, and thank you, Cassia. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Fathom Talaye. I'm a senior manager of programs at the Resilient Cities Network, and I also lead our engagement work across our network cities in Africa. I'm very happy to be joining you here from Addis Ababa today. And as Elsa mentioned, I will be giving you the fundamental, very short description of what we mean by urban resilience and setting the context of what we'll be doing today. So the next slide. As I mentioned, I represent the Resilient Cities Network, which is one of the world's leading urban resilience networks that is made up of 100 plus cities across 47 countries. We bring together knowledge, practice, partnership, and funding to empower cities to reduce the vulnerability and improve the well-being of over 200 million urban dwellers worldwide. So this description of urban resilience comes from our experiences working with cities across the globe over the past decade, and that's what we've been supporting our cities with. The next slide. As Cassie had mentioned in the beginning of this session, our world is changing fast. We're going through multiple transitions and multiple changes, including increased urbanization, of course, climate change and climate impacts, disruptive technologies like AI, and the energy transition that is really making us rethink how we navigate the world, globalization, but also at the same time, inequities are increasing. We are more susceptible to threats like health threats, security threats, as we've seen globally in recent years. Next slide. So in this context, when we're thinking about urban resilience, we think about as the capacity to survive, adapt, and thrive in these types of changes and transitions, no matter what kind of chronic shocks or acute shocks or chronic stresses that we may be facing. So it is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, to endure, and continue functioning, to adapt, to modify or adjust behavior and processes and systems to the current context, and then, of course, to prosper and grow and achieve success and thrive in this changing world. Next slide, please. So when we talk about chronic shocks and stresses or these challenges that we're facing today, they kind of have multiple facets to them. Chronic stresses are slow moving and they're more chronic, and they weaken the fabrics of our systems in our cities, while acute shocks are sudden, sharp events that threaten a city. So chronic stress could be poverty, inequities, homelessness, climate change that happen over time and gradually weaken our systems. And while at the same time, acute shocks could be earthquakes, floods, fires, acute events that happen and suddenly really disrupt how we navigate our cities. Next slide. And this is a list of shock stresses that we've gathered from our Chief Resilience Officers survey in 2023. We're updating that this year, so you will see, if you go to our website, the latest shocks and stresses our cities are dealing with. But really across the board, there is a similarity of what we're experiencing. In terms of shocks, floods are the biggest shocks that are experienced across our network, as well as heat waves and heat stress, which is rising drastically, as you know. And there's also disease outbreaks, droughts, civil unrest, riots, conflicts that are also shocks that our cities are experiencing. At the same time, stresses like climate change, lack of affordable housing, congestion, informal settlement expansion due to increased urbanizations, particularly in our Africa and Asian cities, poverty, crime and violence are also experienced. But these things, they don't happen separately from each other. They actually intersect and compound. And so when we're thinking about resilience, we have to think about these intersectionalities and these moments of how these challenges compound to weaken our systems. Next slide. An example of that could be the cascading crisis of flooding we've seen recently in cities like Nairobi. And this is, again, not something unique to Nairobi, but we're seeing it globally across the world with flash floods and sea level rise, really, and also increased intensities of hurricanes and tornadoes and other weather systems really impacting the resilience of cities. Now, although those shocks in themselves could be devastating, we also have to zoom out and see what level of resilience or what level of vulnerability cities have in order to not just address them, but to also understand the impacts that they will have. So for instance, in the case of Nairobi, yes, it's been the country in Kenya as a whole and East Africa as a whole has been impacted by the El Nino effect, which has made intense rains more intense. There's rapid urbanization where the city's population has grown from 100,000 to 4.5 million within decades, where infrastructure has not been able to keep up. So there are poor drainage planning, not just from the expansion of infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, but also from the lack of solid waste management systems that are keeping drains or the existing drains clean, open sewers that are worsening flooding, and also the aftermath of flood events and disease outbreak. And then there is the question of inequities. There are vulnerable settlements and formal neighborhoods that are built across the city in floodplains where water is supposed to be collect with no proper sewage and drainage. So the question of inequities also comes in here. And then lastly, there is concrete overload or urban sprawl that has reduced absorbent green spaces so that the city's capacity to really absorb the water from these types of events has diminished significantly over the years, and water has nowhere to go. So there is then the big shock, which is the rains that have happened, and these stresses that have continuously over time weakened the capacity of the city to withstand the shock that have made the outcomes of the floods much more devastating than they could have been. So when we're thinking about shocks and stresses, we think about these interconnectivities and also think about how we use them as opportunities for evolution or to evolve, and in some circumstances to even transform in order to keep up with the changing realities that we're living in. So we talk about the capacity to use disruptions and downturns as a way of bouncing forward or becoming stronger. Next slide. And this is underpinned by systems thinking. So our cities are made up of physical assets such as buildings, roads, parks, healthcare center systems, but then they're also made up of process-based assets like laws, community cooperation, cohesion, standards, information sharing system, and information sharing systems. And when we're talking resilience and resilience to shocks and stresses, we're really not thinking about these separately, but looking at them as a whole of what how they intersect with each other. So that systems thinking and the capacity to connect how systems rely upon each other, but also how different shocks and stresses impact them and compound upon them is very critical to resilience thinking and building robust systems. Next. And so we have, over the last 10 years of work, have identified 7 qualities of resilience or resilient systems that help us really build or strengthen our cities or make them resilient, not just to survive and adapt, but as we discussed, to thrive in times of sudden changes, shocks, and stresses. So systems are reflective, so they're able to learn from the past and from others. They are resourceful, so they can easily repurpose resources, stretch existing resources to meet current demands. They are robust, so they're well conceived, constructed, and managed. They are redundant. They have backup capacity to failure. So there's a backup for the backup, and there's always a plan B. They're flexible. They're able to alternate strategies and move and adapt to the changes being experienced. They are inclusive, so they include broad consultation throughout, not just of different city stakeholders, but also of people, of nature, and so on. And then they're integrated. These systems, be it the water system, the energy system, other systems that we rely on, the laws, the information systems, really are interconnected with each other and cognizant of each other. And when we're thinking about resilience in this context and using these 7 qualities as a guidance, we're able to identify resilience for whom, who are we protecting, who are we building resilience for, and what are we protecting them for, and of what systems that we're building resilience. Next slide. So just to recap then, resilient systems are, they're, as we mentioned, reflective, so they have the ability to learn, they have the ability to act quickly. They're conceived of systems and assets that can withstand shocks and stresses while also having alternative strategies to facilitate rapid recovery and improvements. And then they're planned to take into account the needs of many, diverse needs, and they're also able to promote coordinated actions. Next slide. So just as a recap of what we mean about resilience, urban resilience, it's understanding shocks and stresses and understanding these challenges and how they interact with one another and how they can be addressed in a manner that improves our systems. It's considering the interconnectivity of all systems, so how understanding and solving complex problems that look at the whole picture of the cities we live in rather than just individual parts. Emphasizing relationships, patterns, and dynamics. And then lastly, it's planning for co-benefits or multipliers. And in recognition of the system interconnectivity, there's not really one challenge that sits or stands alone. Right? It's recognizing that challenges interact and solutions need to also have be able to understand these interactions and not just solve for one key challenge, but generate added positive impacts.
Fortunately, we don't have time for the last slide. We're going to have to move on to the case study.
But I will, maybe we can share it in the chats, but it's just the benefits of acting on resilience, which I think we all agree are significant, and that's why we're here. Given this lesson, and also going back to the description of port of resilience that Elsa has given, the first question we have for you in our case study is really, what do you expect are key stresses that port of resilience is facing that are worsening the impacts of the frequent flash floods it faces? You can scan the code here, and going back to the description, think about how it's a city that is aiming to that has social vulnerabilities, but is also trying to become more of a hub for green economic activity. So there is a lot of potential movements there. So I think Elsa will.
I'll transition back to give a quick overview to those who maybe have missed the context of the Port of Resilience. It's a fictional case study. It's a coastal town, mid-sized. It's facing increasing vulnerability due to climate change, flash flooding, etc. Just last year, 10% of people were evacuated overnight because of a flash flooding event. So just with this context, think about some of the key stresses that it's facing and how these stresses, such as social inequality, etc., might exacerbate the impacts of the flash flooding. So I'll just pop over to the responses that we've been getting. Thank you very much, Fathom, for that great presentation. If I share, just shout out when you can see this. Here we go. We're getting some great responses here. Inequality, exactly. Policy, economic decline, degraded infrastructure. I would actually, add to that aging infrastructure, compliance, waste. These are some great responses. We're going to have to move on to the next presentation, but we can, maybe if we have some time to reflect at the end, we might go back to this question. But keep adding your responses in there. We'd like to reflect on those. Fantastic. So we've just heard from Fathom how important it is for cities to know their baseline resilience, to understand where they are now, and how vulnerable they'll be to the impact of climate change. And every city faces different water challenges. Some are increasing flooding, some is drought. And resilience, it takes time to build. It's complex. It requires investment in infrastructure. It requires investment in governance, in communication, in regulation. So at Arup, we use different tools to help produce these baseline understandings and offer a vision for the future of resilience of cities. So our tools and frameworks to achieve this have changed over the past 10-ish years. Initially, the City Resilience Index was a milestone in thinking about the shocks and stresses that cities face. But it was found actually that in each of the case studies, in each of the cities where this index was applied, water kept coming back as one of the key challenges. So this then led to a deep dive into water and zoning in on that and producing the city water resilience approach. Here's a quick timeline of the different locations, with the latest case study being in Lagos, Nigeria. But I'm not going to dwell on that because Cassia has a great case study to show you about that. But here are some of the 20-ish cities and regions across the world where we've applied the city water resilience approach. You can see very different contexts, very different geographies, economic setups, and cultural settings as well. To be truly effective, this approach is built on those 4 key pillars that you can see here. And they build exactly on what the definition of resilience that Fathom gave us earlier. You have to be inclusive and transparent, involving the stakeholders, the residents, the businesses. This is a locally applied approach. It only works if you have that collaboration. It needs to be system-based, so water resilience isn't isolated. Water systems are interlinked with energy, with waste, with everything else in our system. It's part of this big web of interdependent systems. Then it's holistic, so it looks at leadership, not just the assets, but the leadership that underpins it, the financial mechanisms, the overall resilience of the city, to see the full picture. And finally, it's action oriented. So the CWRA, it doesn't just output theory, it sets out a clear path forward, and it implements both. It offers some short-term and some long-term solutions that are tailored to each of the different stakeholders. And so there are 5 steps, and we're going to look at the first 3 very briefly. But the first step is understanding the system through engaging the stakeholders, identifying those shocks and stresses, just as you've done right now with that case study in the Port of Resilience. And it maps the key infrastructure. So to do this, we produce this tool called wastewater, which is quite nifty. It helps us visualize these interdependencies within the system to illustrate what the connections are between the different components of the water system. It helps us understand how a disruption in one of the components. So for example, here, it's very small, I'm sorry, but I think it's the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. So the Ministry of Water and Sanitation is interlinked with all of those other assets that you can see around it. So a disruption there will disrupt the rest of the system entirely. So it helps highlight those gaps and those vulnerabilities. The second step is to assess the water resilience through this diagnostic lens that we produce to evaluate the current water management practices, identifying the strengths, the weaknesses of the system, and the gaps across the leadership, the governance, the infrastructure, like we were saying earlier, that holistic picture. So let me show you quickly what the result of one of these diagnostic lenses is. The picture is very blurry, but you can kind of see where the attention needs to focus. And actually the goal that's scored the worst here is how effective the city is to address disaster relief and recovery. And so we can know that in our step 3, when we're developing an action plan, that is actually where we need to focus in our efforts. So step 3 is all about taking those understandings from the first 2 steps and developing that action plan. And it translates that diagnostic lens into concrete initiatives, both in the short term and then the long term, to align with the existing city strategies and plans, and exacerbating that and giving them a good way forward. So I'll pass on to Cassie now to show you how that implements in real life with the case study in Lagos.
Thank you, Elsa. So as Elsa mentioned, we are doing the city water resilience approach in Lagos at the moment, and we are on that stage 3 of developing an action plan. So to just give some context of Lagos as a place, Lagos is one of the fastest growing cities in the world, with its population expected to exceed 30 million by 2050. But this rapid growth brings significant pressures, as we all understand. It comes along with aging infrastructure, fragmenting governance, rising water demand, and mounting climate risks such as flooding, drought, and sea level rise. So we have a clear challenge that Lagos must build resilience while continuing to grow. Right now, current water production meets less than half of the daily demand, and only 10% of residents have access to safe piped treated water. Non-revenue water remains extremely high, putting additional strain on already limited resources. But the issues go way beyond infrastructure, and the sector struggles with policy gaps, overlapping institutional mandates, weak regulation, financing bottlenecks, and fragmented data systems. All of these make it harder to plan effectively, coordinate action, and attract the scale of investment Lagos urgently needs. So to fully understand the realities of Lagos, our team on the ground, Arup, in Nigeria have engaged directly with stakeholders across government, utilities regulators, the private sector, and civil society. Through in-depth interviews, collaborative workshops, and data reviews, we have gathered insights into both the barriers and the opportunities to shape Lagos and its water future, and these local perspectives have been critical in shaping this approach. So, working together, we've created a shared vision for Lagos, and this is a resilient, enabling environment that empowers the city to deliver safe, reliable, and affordable water services now and into the future. This vision is anchored on four pillars: institutions and leadership, policy and regulation, data and information, and finance and investment. So, with this shared vision as our foundation, we have co developed the Enabling Environment Roadmap for Lagos. This roadmap sets out a series of practical sequence actions designed to strengthen governance and cross agency coordination, digitise data, build a pipeline of bankable projects, and mobilise private and public funding at scale. What I'd just like to highlight that's relevant to today's session is that one of our most significant actions is the emergence of an integrated water information system, which is a digital platform that consolidates data on water resources, infrastructure, demand, and climate risks. And by bringing together what was previously fragmented, this system will enable evidence-based planning, identifying priority investment needs, and strengthening regulatory oversight. Alongside this system, we propose that Lagos also develops an investment blueprint, which is a pipeline of bankable, finance-ready projects aligned with the city's resilience goals. So together, these tools will attract investor confidence, support the design of climate risk insurance products, and unlock blended finance and green finance going forward. This integrated approach is helping Lagos move from risk to resilience and turning plans into action, unlocking sustainable investment at scale. So I'd just like to hand back to Elsa now to add to that next step of our acting case study of the Port of Resilience.
Thanks, Cass. So we've now identified some of the key shocks and stresses for the Port of Resilience. Our next question that we're going to be thinking about is, what type of interventions would you propose for the Port of Resilience? What should they start exploring? What's that vision? And it's the same exact Menti code. So we'll just give you a minute to scan that and start inputting stuff, and then we'll share some of those responses. So just to give the context to those who are just joining us now, the Port of Resilience is this mid-size, it's fictional, mid-size coastal city facing increasing risks with climate change. We've spoken about flash flooding being one of the main shocks that keeps happening, but stresses that were highlighted in the previous session included aging infrastructure, social inequality, and others. So let's just pause there and, oh, maybe you can't see the next question on the Menti. Let me just change the slide. Here we go. Are you now seeing this? So from the shocks and stresses identified, what are the key interventions that you would propose we look into for this case study? Oh, wow. Infrastructure, investment in infrastructure, early warning systems, yeah. Governance reform. Are there any hard infrastructure solutions? I'm thinking coastal protection. There's a like there. That makes great. Amazing. We'll keep putting your answers in there while we move on to our next presenter. We're getting some great responses now. I'm just going to quickly go back to the slides. fantastic. And I'm very happy to be passing over to Harry from Fathom.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Elsa and Cassia, for that as well. Just to introduce myself, my name is Harry Vardigans. I head up the insurance sector here at Fathom. For those of you that don't know who Fathom are, we are a flood modeling company. So we are based in Bristol in the UK, with offices in London as well. And we provide data in not just insurance, but within the engineering sector, within public sector, as well as capital markets as well. Jump onto the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So yeah, today I'm going to be addressing the question of the role of data in catalyzing investment, and I guess more specifically, how insurers use data such as the Fathom flood models in the ability to price risk and then ultimately drive investment into infrastructure projects. But before I go into that, what I want to do is set the scene, and highlight actually some of the key protection gaps. So when I say protection gaps, what I mean is the gap between ultimate economic losses from natural catastrophes, and then the gap from that to what is being insured. And so, as we can see on the slide here, that the total global losses from natural catastrophe events in 2024 was around 318 billion US dollars, of which only 137 billion of those were insured. So that's a protection gap of about 57%. Moving on to the next slide, we can then see the share of that insurance coverage. And we can see that within the advanced markets or developed world, 81.3% of the locations were insured and contribute to that insurance side. But there's a huge proportion of the emerging markets where there's a large protection gap. So only 18.7% of the total economic losses were insured in the emerging and developed world. And that's a stark contrast to what we see in advanced markets. And if we're to pull up figures from the UN Trade and Development Department, there's actually a gap of around 2.5 trillion in infrastructure investment. So it was interesting to see in the last question for the case study, a lot of people highlighting infrastructure development as one of those key elements that can help protect the port of resilience. But in the developed world, there's a key lack of that. So how can we address this, and why is there a gap between the advanced markets and developing and emerging markets? Well, one of those things is purely data, as well as multiple other factors, obviously contributing to it. But coming from the world of vendors, modeling vendors for natural catastrophes, we know that there is a huge sway of vendors that focus on modeling for the United States, and often it being just hurricane or earthquake modeling, or even in the Western world, Western Europe, or wildfires in Australia. And actually, there's a data gap there for other emerging and developing markets such as South America or the Middle East and Africa and Southeast Asia and the likes. So there's a huge information gap. And part of the reason why insurers can't provide insurance in these regions is simply they don't have the data to be able to price the risk, assess the risk, and ultimately provide that insurance. So what we've done at Fathom is provide a global flood map and a global catastrophe model. So when I say a global flood map, what I mean is purely a probabilistic map that shows you the probabilities of flooding for any given point anywhere in the world. And this is really, really important for the ability for insurers to write global risks rather than just focusing the risk that they support in the United States and North America, which is where we see most insurers doing. And this provides a 30-meter resolution global map. And we provide not just the flood depths, but also risk scores for all subperils of flooding as well. So that's palluvial, fluvial, and coastal. And then moving on to the global catastrophe model, and I'll highlight exactly how insurers tend to use these later on. But the global catastrophe model then takes those probabilities of flooding for any given point, but then puts it into a wider context. So if you were to insure a location in in one spot, what is the likelihood that another location further up a river catchment is also going to flood at the same time? And so looking at that correlation of events and that correlation of potential losses that insurers would look at. So jumping onto the next slide, please. So this isn't actually a case study from one of our insurers. This is from one of our energy clients. So this is actually EDF Energy, and you can find the case study on the Fathom website. But they use the flood maps, in fact global flood maps, to assess where are the most risky spots for flooding for solar farms. Now, when there's a project going up and they can't assess every single site that potentially they would like to place these solar panels, what they do is they use the Fathom maps to assess where is the most risky areas, where are the areas of least risk, and then they would perhaps bring in a consultant, also one of Fathom partners, such as Arup, to then go in and really give that very detailed flood modeling view. So what's Fathom providing is that more high level view that insurers would use to price, and then Arup would really get on the ground and almost measure to the 8th degree the potential areas for flooding, and then also how do you combine that with mitigation measures as well. So this is one of the case studies, and this is for a singular site that a insurer would then look at to price and underwrite that risk. But as I said, insurers aren't just worried about a singular location, so a single infrastructure project or a singular building. What they are also worried about is the correlation of risk and the accumulation of risk. And this is where the catastrophe model comes in. And so the insurer may be looking to insure let's say a levee or a coastal defense on our port of resilience. But actually, if they were to insure that, what would that do to their accumulation of risk, and how would they then stop one potential flood event causing a catastrophic loss for the insurer and making them go insolvent? So they would then use the catastrophe model to then look at, all right, now along this river catchment, we have insured, and you can see on your screen little yellow dots. We are insuring all of these locations. What is the likelihood that one singular event could cause a loss across all of our portfolio, across all of the different locations that we insure? And that's really what an insurer is looking to mitigate with the catastrophe model. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, in the next 10 seconds I have left, so it's 4 points. There is a correlation between the insurance protection gap and infrastructure investment. In fact, I'm going to read the bottom line so I don't run over time. Ultimately, with the new data enabling insurance companies to provide insurance, investors have more confidence to provide investment in new areas not previously possible. So ultimately, what I'm saying here is once a resilience project crosses the threshold of insurability to be able to get insurance, that provides the capital markets area and provides the confidence in investors to then be able to send their funds and support projects in areas that the insurance sector is providing that risk and ultimately reducing the risk for the investor. And I think we're now going on to the port of resilience question. So now that we've identified, and many of you had highlighted that in the project, there's a few infrastructure projects that will be able to increase the port of resilience. Can you identify any unintended outcomes from these projects that may be of interest to the insurance provider?
I'm just going to go to the next question. There we go. Are you able to see the next question? Not on the screen yet, but on the Menti, hopefully. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, population growth is a very interesting one. So that's actually an increase in exposure. Again, it's something that Fathom has highlighted that it's not just climate change that is the key driver of losses, economic losses and insurance losses into the future, but it's also actually just the increase of urbanization. So the population growth is key as people become more confident to live in those areas, and the infrastructure may be able to block out a smaller, maybe a 1 in 100 year event, but those catastrophic, maybe a category 5 hurricane, may not have the ability to hold back from that. But then also another one to think of is that correlation piece. So if you are defending a coastal area, what impact is that going to have in terms of coastal erosion further up the coast, and is that actually going to impact perhaps a power station that they insure away from the port of resilience, but is still then put at risk? Because in flood events, water has to go somewhere. You can't just get rid of the water. So you protect one area, it's going to be affected more in a slightly different area.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. We don't necessarily hear a lot about insurance in water resilience, so it's really interesting to hear that it's being considered more and more. So we'll now pass on to Derek, who's from Pegasus, who's gonna talk to us a bit more about climate financing mechanisms. Over to you, Derek.
Thanks, Elsa. Thanks very much. It's Derek Weston. I'm an associate director at Pegasus. You can go to the next one. Thanks, Elsa. Yeah, we're a UK-owned firm. We're part of the RSK group, but we're actually housed in Africa. Our main office is in Cape Town. I'm based in Pretoria here in South Africa, but we do have a London office as well. I think what I want to talk about really is how we sort of support and guide finance into addressing these developmental challenges. And we know we are facing an increasingly uncertain future. And there is much we still need to understand and prepare to be ready for these sort of possible climate futures. What we recognize in Pegasus is that we need multidisciplinary skill sets and teams. We need solutions that really are rooted in pragmatism, and probably most importantly, we need to develop and maintain effective partnerships, particularly between the private sector, the public sector, and civil society. This is requiring us to work across sectors and to really develop integrated solutions, where historically we've really worked in silos. I think in the municipal environment, these integrated solutions are typically difficult, as these institutions are not really organized to operate in this manner. So the real challenges often are not just technical, but are often political, institutional, and financial. And of course, these are probably more important or more difficult to actually address. In the developing world, access to climate finance is becoming increasingly important for interventions needed to build climate resilience. To do this, we really need to understand the potential climate futures which we're facing and the relevant hazards and risks that need to be mitigated. And I think what Cassie and Harry have spoken to provide that sort of rich understanding of these and how these impact on the sort of social economy. And this is really important to understand because the climate financing ecosystem is busy and complex, and often with very niche for sort of focal areas. It's also really important to understand the barriers that we need to overcome in assessing the finance, and to develop a case that really addresses these in a systematic manner to get to the solutions needed. Often the complexity of developing investment-ready projects, and structuring the finances needed is often beyond the capacity of these cities and the public sector institutions that manage these city contexts. Hence, what we've seen is the establishment of a climate finance facility, particularly in these developmental contexts, becomes really attractive, because then it really provides a center of excellence which can really help you unlock these sort of resilience building projects. Thanks, Elsa. Sorry. The development of a business case to support the establishment of a climate finance facility or any other form of institutional arrangement is a useful process because it progressively helps you to develop the required institutional solution you need. It helps you to map out the various steps, tools, instruments, and systems you need to operationalize the institution. It helps you to build public, private, and civil society support, but also importantly helps you to build the capacity you need at the same time. So the process to establish and operationalize an institution such as a climate finance facility can really help you get to implementation. And we know that that implementation might take time, but when undertaken effectively, one can get closer to the implementation readiness through the maintenance of engaged and participative processes. Typically what we see in cities, and I think Harry has described this very well, as has Cassie and actually fits up right at the start of the session, is that there's much pressure to deliver services, particularly under the context where we're seeing rapid sort of rural urban migration. These municipalities typically find it difficult to navigate the climate financing space. And often this comes with a range of intergovernmental complexities and requirements as well, which is often beyond these cities and municipalities. And often they don't have the competencies and the staff capacity that's really required to sort of put these instruments in place. I think also the history of poor project preparation in many cities also makes it difficult to mobilize the resources that we need. And particularly the private sector then views these sort of public sector projects as being far too risky. So again, coming back to the climate finance facility, it really helps you to put in place something that can, a facility that can provide you with consistent and quality standard projects that can help you crowd in that finance, and particularly the insurance sector, as well as being sort of catalytic in developing your projects. Our case study particularly is in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, like many countries in Southern Africa, is facing significant climate risk. Their readiness to handle these uncertainties is some of the weakest globally. There is a dire need to address the infrastructure backlogs in the country, often in smaller secondary cities where capacity is limited and the local economy is equally weak. In these more sort of rural contexts, these districts face real risks around flooding, droughts, wildfires, and so forth. Under these conditions, the loss of built and green infrastructure is having catastrophic impact on local livelihoods. Often there's little insurance, which talks to Harry's point just now. Often the infrastructure is public funded, and the public sector ends up footing the bill together with international aid. And there's often lengthy timeframes involved in this, which is devastating to local communities. From an insurance perspective, there's definitely a need to really address these with new products and new thinking. And I think Harry's spoken to some of that. Principally, there's a need to make public sector finances in Zimbabwe useful to leverage these climate finance funds and so forth, and to develop new funding instruments. Each context is different and each requires a bespoke solution. The levels of uncertainty, the difficulties of financing, and the governance challenges make this more and more difficult. Thanks, Elsa. You can go to the next one. Thank you. Thus the establishment of the sort of Zimbabwe Climate Finance Facility, and we've seen this in South Africa as well, makes lots of sense. Importantly, I think an important point here is the association between this facility and the Development Bank in Zimbabwe. And this then helps these municipalities and these cities prepare finance-ready projects. It helps to build awareness and create sort of the capacity that's needed at municipal level. Obviously, they can support in crowding in the kinds of finance required to fund these investments. And this is particularly difficult, obviously, in these more rural and peri-urban contexts. They obviously provide us a stable and sustainable, consistent financing platform. Obviously, can then facilitate and support cooperation with other financing facilities and instruments. And then lastly, Elsa, it's really important then to develop a coherent case for this and a coherent roadmap towards its operationalization and establishment, and to give clear guidance on all the tools and systems needed to do that. I think in this particular instance, the close relationship between the development bank and the establishment of the facility is really important, because the bank provides the capacity and supporting systems, as well as the credibility to get the facility going. So in conclusion, these kinds of financing facilities, and this might be useful for Port of Resilience, are useful in terms of developing bankable projects, crowding in finance, and structuring financial solutions. Thank you. And then the question we have is, what are the major barriers we have to surmount to unlock climate finance?
Thank you very much, Derek. So hopefully you can all see on the Mentimeter, it's still the same link as before. You should be able to see the next slide. As Derek just said, what are the major barriers that we have to surmount to unlock climate finance? And this is in the context of Port of Resilience, but also in the wider context. Insurability, co-funding of investments, governance, capacity, weak governance.
Yeah, political will is important. Credit worthiness also comes up a lot.
Evidence, that's interesting. What do you think about that, Derek?
That talks in a sense to Harry's point as well, I think, which is really useful. And this is why the insurance sector is finding it difficult, as Harry's rightly emphasized.
Uncertainty.
I think, and of course, in the developing world, one of the real challenges is getting that return on investment. Particularly when we're dealing with cities that've got these huge sort of peri-urban sprawls that are really at risk. Willingness to pay is a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Uncertain incomes. Yep.
Fantastic.
That's great. Thank you so much for your engagement as well, everyone online with these case studies. I think it's also very valuable for us to see what your thoughts are on all of this. I will now hand over to Sasha from the British Expertise International, who will be rounding off this session. So over to you, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and just thank you so much to everybody for convening today's session. It's been absolutely fascinating. So I'm Sasha Barnes. I'm the Director of Infrastructure, Climate and Nature at British Expertise, but I'm also the chair of our Water Resilience Working Group. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know British Expertise, we are the leading UK membership network for organizations that explore infrastructure, international development, and professional services worldwide. And we play a vital role in connecting that UK expertise with global challenges, helping to deliver impactful, resilient, and inclusive solutions. We convene networks, we facilitate knowledge exchange, and we ultimately support that international engagement for our members. And I would encourage all of you to try and connect with some of the outputs. In fact, on the next slide, you will see our latest report from the Water Resilience Working Group. And I think we would be able to share the link with you in chat as well. So as you can see, actually, all of the organizations that have spoken on today's session are members of ours, and I would love to connect with you offline. So this latest report, Water Resilience, Unlocking Local and Global Benefits Through Collaboration, we put this together to support governments, utilities, and global stakeholders who are trying to build water resilience. And this is actually a second edition of this report, launched just last month. And the intended audience for this is agencies such as the UK government, but also international ministries, as well as development banks and water companies and others. In this edition in particular, we had a deep dive on project finance and blended finance for water resilience, as we are all thinking about new ways of funding these projects. And I thought I'd just share a couple of those slides with you today, just so you can see what's in the report. So as other speakers have mentioned already today, blended finance mechanisms, which combine public, philanthropic, and private investments, are increasingly vital for funding water projects across their life cycle, especially those that are considered high risk. Unlike traditional project finance, which relies on revenue-backed loans, blended finance can help unlock capital by mitigating risk and aligning diverse stakeholders. To attract investors, water infrastructure projects must define success early using clear indicators that reflect financial, social, environmental, and of course, adaptive outcomes. And therefore, a collaborative blended financing approach coupled with clear success metrics can drive the necessary investment to build resilient water systems. Just one more little slide for you here, that of course, it's very important to consider that across the different stages of project maturity, different blended finance models may need to be applied. As you can see in this graphic, from short-term financing sources such as grants and philanthropic funding at the start, driving through to de-risking and scaling mechanisms such as concessional loans, and finally to the market-driven models, ultimately making the project sustainable. Do please have a look at our report. It includes 26 different case studies, and you can see little droplets there to show you where all of those case studies are from. These are our members' real-world experiences in risk assessment, decision-making, community engagement, and innovative water infrastructure from across a range of markets and contexts. And BEI members and stakeholders consistently highlight that to drive more climate finance into water resilience projects, we must take a targeted and collaborative action. This is just a few examples showing you where some of these case studies come from. Just to sum up, I guess, what we've seen today is a compelling journey from understanding why resilience matters to how we assess and structure it, and finally, how we de-risk it to attract investment. And of course, the final step now is turning this roadmap into reality. At British Expertise International, our role is to help cities like Port Resilience move from ambition to action. That means packaging their resilience roadmap into bankable projects that speak the language of investors, donors, and development banks. We work with partners to align technical interventions with financing instruments and ensuring that those investments are inclusive, sustainable, and scalable. With the right financing strategy, Port Resilience can become a regional hub for green innovation while protecting its people, infrastructure, and economy from climate shocks. Resilience isn't just a cost, it's an opportunity. And I truly believe that with a coherent path like the one that we've seen today, it is an investable one too. I'm going to hand over now to Elsa and Kasia in case we still have one more minute for Q&A. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for that wonderful roundup of a great session. And thank you so much to our speakers. We'll just take one question from the chat with the last 3 minutes we've got. And I think we'll keep it insurance focused. So Harry, if you're okay to answer this question, based on which criteria do insurers select the projects they will insure to decrease the insurability gap? And to which degree do they collaborate with governments to identify priorities for risk insurance?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Cassie. And thank you, Marissa, also for asking the question. So I guess it would depend on the certain project and what is being insured, but ultimately they would consider all of the information provided to them by the broker, which is something which they would get from perhaps the actual policy holder that provides whether there is mitigation elements within a certain project. But then also internal data that the insurer has. So a data set like Fathom's data set, which gives you probable outcomes and potential for catastrophic losses. But then also their own insurance claims history as well. So what have been the claims in a certain region or area? And then to which degree do they collaborate with governments? Again, it kind of depends on what type of insurance they provide. But often what is purchased by large governments is parametric insurance, and that is something where insurers do collaborate hugely with governments in terms of closing that gap. So it could be in terms of parametric insurance for agriculture, for example, and providing it in that sense. So yeah, again, it depends on the type of insurance, but very much the parametric side of things is worked on with governments.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Harry, for answering that. And I can see there's some brilliant questions in the chat. And now we don't have time today, but please do reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn, and we can personally get in touch with you to answer those questions. So thank you all for being here. And thank you again to our speakers for a great session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.